Alright, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD program, and in particular the AWD1100 C# Programming Fundamentals class, I've been doing a series of video presentations based on the textbook that is used for the class, and in particular that textbook, as you can see here, is Muroc C# 2015. Alright, and so far I have gone through all of the first section, all of the second section, all of the third section, and chapter 17 from the fourth section. Now, I was going to mention something, and I don't know if this is worth mentioning or not, but I'm just going to try to see if I can show it. Alright. I remember a long time ago, let's see, where is it? I'm looking for an example here. They are not correct here. Nope. They are showing some division examples, and I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to put in old-fashioned long division examples. Let's see if we have any. Nope. No. Alright, back when I was a kid, and I don't think I'm even going to be able to really show you this, but back when I was a young kid, we learned division in what was called the old-fashioned way of doing long division. And I'm not going to make a bunch of mathematical symbols for you, etc. But it seemed like a lot of work. And after we learned that and got fairly proficient at it, they taught us short division, which now they're calling on here long division. But the point is, I remember, even though I was fairly young, I remember asking my teacher, why did we have to learn to do it the long way when no one does it that way? Well, it made it easier for you to understand how to do short division. I don't think it did. All right, maybe she was correct. I don't know. But the point is, in my humble opinion, chapters 18, 19, and 20 show you what I consider to be an older way of doing databases, where I think chapters 23 and 24 are a newer way. So I'm going to go through these, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I'll spend more time on these two chapters, just so you're aware of that. Alright, so let's jump right into here, how to work with data sources and data sets. And we have what? 5 knowledge, 5 applied, and 5 knowledge objectives are applied. Use a data source to get the data that an application requires. Use a data grid view control to present the data that's retrieved by a data source. Use other controls like text boxes to present the data that's retrieved by a data source. Write the code for handling any data or errors that result from the use of the data source or the controls bound to it. Finally, use the dataset designer to perform 4 operations. Number 1, view the schema for the dataset. Number 2, modify a query using the query builder. Number 3, preview the data for a query. And number 4, review the SQL statements generated for a data source. Alright, our knowledge objectives, we've got 6 here. Describe the use of a connection string in an app.config file. Describe the use of the fill method of the table adapter object and the update all method of the table adapter manager object. Describe the use of endEdit, that method of the binding source object. Describe the 2 categories of data errors that can occur when you run an application that uses a data source. Describe the use of the data error event for a data grid control. And in general terms, describe the way SQL statements are generated for a data source to first prevent concurrency errors and second refresh a data set when the database generates the keys for new rows. So this is the data sources window. So what we have here is basically a blank form as you can see. And once we do that and we click the Add New Data Source, it's going to show us in the box here all of the different fields for whatever table we're working with. Notice it's products, but if we click the down arrow, we would see the other tables that we looked at earlier, the 5 or 6 other tables that we had. But over here it shows you, so I can now go and drag any one or more of these fields out there. All right, and it basically what I have is I'm able then to use the equivalent of a form window to put my database fields there. All right, as I'm going through this, there is a wizard that comes open and it says, well, what are you working with? And here we'd be working with a database. It doesn't really pay to talk about the other things that are here. All right, we have to have a database connection. We have to find a way to connect our database to our program. Usually you'll end up clicking the new connection and you'll get it from there. The system will figure this out for you. So the data source here, notice it says local DB, attach file name. All right, and so this has got basically that data source that we talked about in the last chapter. This will be the actual name of the database, .mdf, which I believe stands for Microsoft Database File. Integrated security is true, meaning using the regular Windows security. Connect timeout is 30, and I think that means, I think it's seconds and not minutes, that it'll keep trying to connect, and if it can't connect in that amount of time, it'll just stop. All right, so that was step 2. So step 1, you pick database. Step 2, you establish your connection. Step 3, you choose a database model. Well, it's pretty easy when that's the only one that's in there. So set up your data set. That'll bring up this Add Connection dialog box. And in this Add Connection dialog box, what you can see in there is your data source, which can be changed, but usually it'll be set up like this. The actual database file, so you make sure that you're hooked up to the right one. Then you've got your choice. If you use Windows authentication, which most people do, all right, that means that if you're logged on to your Windows account, you can access the database as well. If you change this to use SQL Server authentication, these will become ungrayed, and you will have another layer of protection where not only logging in with your Windows credentials will suffice, but you'll also have to give a username and password to get to the database. So typically you set it up similar to what's shown here. You click on the test connection, which usually will sound the computer bell, which means it all worked, and then you click OK. All right. So if you didn't want to connect with Microsoft SQL Server database file, the one here, you could choose, because you can work with Access, with an ODBC or Open Database Connectivity connection like I told you. I think this is SQL Server if it's on a network, and this is Oracle, and this would be some other kind of database. All right. Now it says save the connection string to the application configuration file. Yes, you virtually always want to get this thing checked. When we go over chapters, it's 24 and 25, I believe, at the end of the book, we'll talk about, rather than application config, we'll talk about a file called web config. All right, so this is the information that gets stored in there, and it's pretty much the stuff we saw earlier. Okay? All right, now we have to come in and we have to say, okay, what database object do we want to work with? If we want to be able to work with everything that's in here, everything, we can check tables, views, stored procedures, and functions. You'll notice in here, we've got checked products, which means only, in fact, we've checked just these 3 fields. So the product code, the product description, and the product unit price are the only things we'll have access to, the way that this is working. All right. Now it says here we should omit columns with default values unless they're needed by the application. So in other words, let's say that you have a company that's very small. You just started out. You put a country down, and literally right now 100% of your customers are from the United States of America. Well, if 100% of the customers are from the United States of America, technically you could omit, put that in as a default, and you could kind of omit what was there. All right. Provide values for those columns whenever a row is added to a data set. Well, of course you would. So you'd have all this, and then notice you could start filling things in here. By default, if you move everything over, this is what it's going to look like. And to tell you the truth, this looks fairly similar, not exactly, but fairly similar to the way that it would look if you were using Microsoft Access, if you care. All right. All right, I'm just checking my time here, and I'm at 10 minutes. So it says these are the controls and objects that are created when you start to drag this stuff over. Now, some of these things that get created, this thing right here, this is called your data grid view. It looks a lot like a spreadsheet. Some of the other stuff that get created, the data set, etc., much of that is down here. They're invisible objects. You don't really see them, but they're things that you need in order to be able to communicate with the database. What's kind of neat is this is the code that gets generated automatically for you by Visual Studio. What does that mean? That means without you having to write one line of code, you can set this up where you've got these three fields in your database. All right, the product code, the description, and the unit price. All right, no quantity on hand, but you've got these. You can make changes to any of these fields. All right, and you can typically go down to the bottom, click the plus sign, and add a new record. If you don't want a record that's in there, you can highlight it, click the X, and it's gone. And all that stuff works without you having to write a lick of code. No code whatsoever. It's all done in here. It's written for you by the system itself. All right. And what is that? Well, the fill method basically throws everything out there. And when you make any kind of changes, you'll get an update. All right. It says how to change the default control for a data table. Well, it's data grid view by default. All right. But you can click it so that you put out there text boxes, combo boxes, labels, etc. Again, you got to look at it that your form here is kind of like an easel. You can paint whatever you want to paint onto it. So you could paint this. What would be the advantage of that? Well, you could set this up. You could set this up as well, and it might be easier to go in and fill information in that way. All right, if you were doing it like this. Again, I don't believe you have to write any code. I believe all the code would be written for you. All right, now things can go wrong. Things do go wrong. For instance, if you were in here and it asked, let's say, let's go back to the example we had before. This one, the unit price. What if you left it blank or put in something non-numeric in there? All right, the system would be expecting a number. You'd put in something non-numeric. That would mean that probably an SQL exception would be thrown. Remember, an exception is an exception to the norm, and it's something you typically wouldn't want to have happen. All right? Common members of the data provider exception classes, these are different things that you work with. All right? So typically when you're going to do this, you'll put it inside of a try-catch statement, similar to what you see right here. So again, try to do this. This is a statement that could potentially fail. And if it fails, chances are pretty good that the failure you're going to get is an SQL exception. So either this succeeds and you totally skip the catch, or this fails, you go down here and you get a message that comes up to the user that there was a database error, and it'll show you the problem. All right? Here are some different exception classes. So you can have concurrency, and we've talked about concurrency previously. You can have data exceptions, constraint exceptions, and no null allowed exceptions. So here's some code, as they mention here, that can be used to handle some of these ADO.NET errors. Remember that data grid view in many ways is kind of like working with a spreadsheet. All right. Some of the properties that it has with it: exception, row index, and column index. Now, when you start to really refine this, where you want to be able to add in a bunch of your own code, that means that you're not going to be able to just rely on the system and the code that's written for you. You might either want to refine that code, add to it, or you might actually want to remove it and put in your own code. When you start working with this stuff and you get this, so here we've added this table. This is the information that's in there, all right, and the fill, etc. What we can do is, when we want to come in and be able to start working with this, especially when we want to be able to work with more than one table at a time, we're going to bring up this thing here called the Query Builder. All right, and it's really got 4 different areas in it. It's got this area here that shows all of your tables. It's got this area here that shows all of your different fields. It's got this area here that shows the generated SQL, and it's got this area here that shows the results. All right, so you can end up writing fairly complex things with this. It's pretty doggone powerful. All right, so here's SQL as it says, that retrieves customer rows. And here's more that inserts. It doesn't really look very different from a lot of the stuff that we've worked with previously. Here's SQL that updates a row and then refreshes the data set. Now when you look here, it looks a little funky. You see these @ signs. These @ signs, for lack of better words, are placeholders. So what this would say would be, take what was ever in that text box that's called name, whatever is in here or whatever, all right, and place that into the actual database field called name. When it's an address, place it in address, etc. There is a delete example. All right. Here, as they say, is a state maintenance application. It says you can use a data source and a grid view to maintain the states in the states table. Well, if you look in here, my guess is we're probably going to have 51 entries, because we have the District of Columbia in here, which typically you'd think you probably would want that, but if for some reason you didn't, you would be able to go in and remove it. It says 53, so I don't know what the other one is. Puerto Rico, I don't know. U.S. Virgin Islands, I have no idea. All right. So here is the product maintenance application. It's working with the 3 fields that we looked at earlier. All right. Here is something for tech support as we're adding new versions. All right, and here's something technicians could use. Now, I didn't really go over much code in here. You could even argue and say, well, you didn't go over any code, Jeff. Okay, but as I mentioned to you, I'm doing almost nothing on here talking about the code. All right, and I am going to be talking much more when we get to the last, like chapters 24 and 25, I believe they are. All right, so when I come back in just a couple minutes, and I will, I'm going to be going over chapter 19, which is on how to work with bound controls and parameterized queries. And I will be back with that shortly.